Okay, before we have too much fun with the rest of our power plant semester, we have to talk about the all too familiar topic of regulations and paperwork, because engines have their own regulations and they have their own pubs and stuff that we have to reference as we progress on. So let's talk about the inspection requirements under 14 CFR 43 and Part 91. We understand the requirements under 43, and then we understand the requirements under 91. We then have a basis of understanding to talk about what kind of documentation and what kind of references we're going to use later on. All right, so let's start with Part 43, the maintenance, preventative maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration of engines and propellers in our case. So, Part 43 governs the standards for maintaining, repairing, and altering aircraft components, including engines and propellers. And these are going to be some of the key aspects. First off, who can perform the work? Okay, so a certificated mechanic with the Powerplant rating or an FAA approved repair stations are authorized to perform maintenance, repairs, or alterations on engines and propellers. You have to have your Powerplant rating, or you have to be working under a repair station certificate, in which case you'd have a repairman certificate. Pilots can also perform limited preventative maintenance on propellers, but not on engines unless explicitly permitted under specific conditions. So there's certain things that 43 will allow pilots to do. Engine work's not going to be one of them. However, Appendix A, Subpart C will allow a pilot to do a oil filter change, so therefore you can change your own oil as a pilot. But all the other preventive maintenance that's going to come into like lubing, throttle linkages and inspecting things, all that good stuff, that's all going to be somebody that has to be properly rated in order to work on it. Okay, now maintenance breaks down into three basic categories. One is you have maintenance, just regular maintenance, includes engine overhauls, prop balancing, repairs like engine piston rings or prop blades, change them in and out. Then you have preventive maintenance. So for propellers, it'd be like minor tasks like lubricating them or maybe dressing nicks. But for engines, it's more restricted, and you have to follow manufacturer guidelines. Now, alterations involves a significant change that requires approved data from the FAA. Now, so your pilot can do some preventative maintenance, and whereas a power plant mechanic or a certified repairman has to be able to do all the other two. All right, so Part 43 also governs the performance standards something has to be done to. So, first off, everything has to use FAA approved parts or parts manufacturer approval, which is what PMA stands for. So, FAA PMA parts or no parts otherwise. It actually was just recently in a meeting where an airplane was using non PMA control cables, and those cables broke on them because they weren't tested to the same standards. This goes also for all right. This also it also covers repairs and alterations. They have to all alterations have to follow a an STC or some sort of approved data. It could be field approval from the FAA or any number of sources, but you can't use acceptable data, and we're going to get into what those are, what the differences are here in just a minute. Now, 43 also governs the TCDS and the fact that all aircraft have to be the whole idea of the inspections and make sure you're working towards approved data all have this kind of geared in mind that the state in which the aircraft originally received its airworthiness certification, it should be maintained in or at least returned to. And then if you have to change it, there's a supplemental type certificate that speaks to that change. So that way the FAA knows that that aircraft is taken care as well. First off, it's been certificated to be airworthy and safe, and then secondly, that it will be maintained to be safe throughout the course of its life, regardless of what happens, provided that we maintain that TCDS. So that's what Part 43 is going to be fundamentally interested in. Now, whenever we get to doing inspections, we're going to end up doing 100-hour inspection, annual inspections, and those types of things on these engines. Those inspections have to be signed off by an inspection authorization, an IA. So you hear people say A and PIA, so your IA has to sign off on any inspections you're doing, and what they are inspecting for is, has that aircraft been maintained to maintain the original state it was in whenever it came off the factory floor and was compliant with its TCDS. That's what you're inspecting for. That's what the inspection is for, is to make sure that it's compliant with that TCDS. Okay, now let's talk about Part 91 and what it brings to the table. First off, 91 is going to talk about airworthiness. So, engine and propellers must be in an airworthy condition as defined by Part 91, meaning they conform to the original approval design of the TCDS. They are in a condition for safe operation, free of unaddressed defects or damage. So, it can't just be broke and falling apart. And then maintenance has to align with manufacturer instructions or FAA accepted programs to ensure the airworthiness. In other words, you have to either follow the aircraft maintenance manual, or you have an agreement with the FAA to maintain that aircraft per Part 91. Then there's operational requirements. So specific flight operations may impose additional requirements on engines and propellers, such as high altitude flights or extended over water flights. And mechanics have to ensure these components meet the operational demands of that flight. So you can't release an aircraft to go fly over the ocean if it's not been rated for it, or go too high, or whatever the thing is. But 91 is what governs those operational requirements. It also governs equipment and systems. So engines and propellers have to support critical aircraft systems to include electrical systems, hydraulic systems, and those systems have to be functional and compliant with the regulations for the intended operation. Kind of an example of that is that, like, for night flight, you have to have like a source of power, so that's beyond a battery. So like you'd have to have like a generator or something to that effect. And then safety. So it also impact or 91 also governs how the mechanics ensure safety by performing proper checks and addressing any issues and malfunctions before the aircraft is released for flight. Now, so basically, the 43 focuses on maintenance and technical standards for engine propellers, while 91 emphasizes on operational readiness and safety during flight. So essentially, 43 is the mechanics Bible, but the 91 shows how mechanics fit into the greater picture of safe flight. Okay, so now before we get too much further, let's talk about what is FAA approved data. We're going to review that, and then let's look at what could potentially be approved data in the realm of engines and propellers. Okay, so approved data and acceptable data. So we're just going to go down this graphic here, and we're just going to talk through the differences. So approvals. FAA approved data is formally approved by the FAA. That means that it's going to be a TCDS, an STC, something like that, an airworthiness directive. You can also have approved data from the manufacturer if it's mentioned in like an AD. I'll give you an example. I was working on a IO 540 that had a turbo on it, and the AD that we were inspecting it for said, "Hey, look, conduct this AD in accordance with," and then it had a manufacturer publication that was mentioned, and so we had to go find that to figure out what the AD was actually asking us to do. So at that point, that becomes approved data because the FAA is approving that service bulletin or whatever it was to reference in that whole thing. Now, acceptable data is not formally approved but deemed suitable. So typical one that always gets reference here is AC 4313. So if it's a minor repair or alteration, you can use AC 43 as the basis to do that minor repair alteration. An example would be like working on my airplane. I had to change out a fuse for a circuit breaker because we couldn't get the fuse anymore, or the fuse holder anymore, and so it's a minor alteration per Part 43, so we use AC 43 to sign it off. All right, the application. We have approved data is major repairs and alterations. So, and that it's major repairs and alterations per Part 43. Acceptable data happens on minor repairs and alterations and maintenance. All right, so an approved data authority is coming directly from the FAA. They're saying do it just this way, exactly this way. Now, acceptable data in those realms, it's really kind of on the mechanic and the eye. Whoever's buying the work, that's where we're relying on your training and experience to come in. That like, hey, look, this is the right way to do things. This is a good way to do things, so on and so forth. All right, so let's talk about documentation. FAA approved data often requires a Form 337, so you're having to like send off this stuff to the FAA saying this is how we're going to do X, Y, or Z repair or alteration or whatever. They sign it off, they send it back, then you can knock out that repair, put it in the logbook, off you go. Now, acceptable data is just typically it's just like you're going to make an annotation in the logbook. Hey, look, we did X, Y, or Z per this, and off you go. And that is those are the key differences. Now, when we start looking about this with engines and propellers, the thing to remember is that like there are service bulletins, there is manufacturer documents that we need that are outside the maintenance manual that we'll have to go and source and we'll get. And those can be both acceptable and it can be approved data. So, like on this graphic here, it says that acceptable data is a service letter. All right, now that's true. However, if an AD says, "Hey, look, do this per X, Y, or Z service letter," then at that point, that service letter becomes approved data because the FAA has approved that repair per that service letter, and that's true with any of the other different types of data that you could get from a manufacturer. But with that review done, let's drive on. All right, now let's talk about compliance with service letters, service bulletins, instructions for continued airworthiness, ADs, and TCDS. What we're like, we'll take them one at a time and talk about what are they and how are they applicable to power plants and to props. Okay, so let's just take these one at a time. We're going to just kind of refresh our memory on how these apply, and we'll kind of give you some examples of how they can apply in the power plant realm. Okay, so first off, we're going to go service letters. They are not mandatory. They get used as just kind of optional things that kind of tips and tricks. These are best practices, how to get the most out of your engine, that sort of thing. Now, what you're going to use it for is you're going to use it as acceptable data if it fits the situation you're in, and then you'll log it and you'll say like per service letter such and such. Though they are fairly common, you'll see them come out, especially in the jet world. Because there's so many appliances, so many kind of niche things that these manufacturers will produce service letters, and they're things that you want to pay attention to. They definitely extend the length of the life of your engine, but generally speaking, they're not going to be mandatory at all. Service bulletins, however, they are not mandatory in and of themselves, but they are often paired with an AD. So basically, an airworthiness directive will come out and say, like, do this thing per this service bulletin. Now, that doesn't always happen. You can have service bulletins that come out and say, like, hey, look, we recommend that you do X, Y, or Z. And that's fine. But most of the time, if it's worthy of producing a service bulletin, it's probably worthy of an airworthiness directive. And so a lot of times they kind of get paired together. They are used for, like it says recommended fixes on there. This is like how you, per the manufacturer, fix some sort of problem. Usually it's things that are not in the maintenance manual. It's some kind of like weirdo random thing that just shows up. All right, and then what you're follow the service bulletin if the owner elects, and check for an AD link. That's what it says on this. But generally speaking, the AD is what's going to prompt you to even check the service bulletin. However, the owner of the aircraft will often get service bulletins sent directly to them based on their based on their ownership of the aircraft. So if you have a Phenom 500 and you're going to be subscribing to the service bulletins that come with that airframe, the engines, the APU, the whole 9 yards. All right, instructions for continued airworthiness, or ICA, are they mandatory? Yes, you have to do ICAs. All right, they're used for maintenance and overhaul, and you will follow them exactly and document them per Part 43. If not, you're effectively violating the TCDS, because the instructions for continued airworthiness, and the TCDS is the type certificate data sheet for the airworthiness of a certain airplane. And so like they carry just as much weight as anything else that you might come across. ADs, Airworthiness Directive. Yes, so everyone knows airworthiness directives published every 2 weeks unless it's an emergency AD, and they're focused mainly on safety critical fixes. So there's like the Piper wing spar, in the Piper Cherokees. It's like a big one right now. It's like there's been cracks found in the wing spars. These planes are used a lot, so therefore, there's an airworthiness directives for you to check that, and you have to comply with that AD in a number of different ways. It gives you all that. So your action then is to comply fully and then log that AD. So one of the first things that you'll do with an annual or a pre-buy is just to see like what ADs are applicable to that airframe, and then which ones have that been complied with. So it's really important that you make sure you do the paperwork. If not, you're basically just kind of shooting your owner in the foot, or if it's your plane, you in the foot. All right, and then the TCDS is like it's a baseline. Like this is what the plane is. It's used for design and approval standards, and then your job is to make sure that the plane conforms with those documents, and then with that document, and then document the deviations. So the TCDS will tell you what prop can go with it, what engine go with it, all kinds of data. And so when you're doing an annual, you're going to make sure that the plane is still in compliance with the TCDS, and you should be good to go. Okay, what are special inspections, and when do we do them? Okay, so what is a special inspection? A special inspection happens whenever there's some sort of event that triggers the special inspection. So, for example, a prop strike, an engine overspeed. In this case, with our picture here, a lightning strike. So the triggering event would be the lightning strike, which whenever these events happen, it means that there has to be, something has to happen. So they're only done whenever they're required, and then so the question becomes like, what do we do? So first off, we have to gather the applicable data, so we could use ICAs, ADs, manufacturer guidance as approved data, supplement with the AC43 as needed, and then that kind of gives us what we're looking for. Therefore, if the lightning struck, like what could potentially be affected, and what do we need to check, and how do we verify that the plane is still in good working order and compliant with the TCDS. So at that point, we have like what we have to do. So in this case, we would visually inspect it, look for burns and cracks, and then we would log whatever we found, and the fact that we had done the inspection based on the data that we worked to. So that's a lightning strike. Now, a prop strike would be different. Engine overspeed would be different, but essentially they always work the same way. There's going to be hard landings, FOD instances. Extended inactivity, and like there's a bunch of different things that could potentially trigger a special inspection, but they all basically follow the same sort of progress. That whatever the triggering event happens, we source the data, perform whatever action the data tells us to, and then log it for compliance reasons. But so for an engine, probably the biggest, most obvious one is a prop strike. Somebody whacks the propeller onto something as it's running that could potentially stress or strain any number of engine components, and now we have to do a prop strike inspection on that engine. Same thing with the prop as well. And the prop's going to have a maintenance task somewhere to basically run through and make sure that it's probably going to be an NDI or something, make sure the prop's not cracked, and the blade's not just going to fly off next time we crank the airplane. All right, so life limited parts. What's a life limited part? What's an example of a life limited part? And how would we determine that based on just our maintenance manual? All right, so let's first talk about what a life limited part is. It's a part that has a limit to how long its life lasts. It's pretty straightforward. And then that life could be measured in any number of ways. It could be cycles if it's a jet. It could be hours, which is probably the most common one. It could be years. It could be any number of things. However, the manufacturer has decided to quantify and then step out its life, that's what matters. All right. So where do we find these life limits at? First off, it's going to be the type certificate data sheet. It's going to tell you, approved configurations and reference life limits for certain power plant components. ICAs could be another one. ADs could be another one. It could simply say that, hey, look, this stuff has been installed for too long. So if you have this part number between this part number or this serial number from this serial number, you need to replace it with, and then they'll give you a recommendation. Another one could be a manufacturer documentation such as bulletins or maintenance manuals, all those things. If you look in the front of your maintenance manual, almost all the time it'll say like, hey, look, this spar on the wing is good for 10,000 hours or something like that. You're going to see those life limits come onto it. And I'll tell you, for you GA guys out there, you get on services such as Varion and their maintenance tracking. It'll have a lot of this stuff pre-programmed in there, and it'll tell you, hey, look, you need to go verify how long has this X, Y, or Z part been installed. Now, this is all governed under Part 43 and 91 that basically says, like, hey, look, you have to perform maintenance using these methods that are acceptable on these parts, and so on and so forth. They're in terms of tracking them and trying to make sure that the life limit is adhered, you're going to have like markings and records that will tell you. So like the markings on, say, like that strut there, it's going to have a serial number on it. That serial number should be tracked in the maintenance records, and you'll go through there and you'll say, like, okay, well, this thing was installed on the aircraft whenever it was built. The aircraft has 10,000 hours on it. It's got a 10,000 hour life limit. We now have to change this. If you go look at my Jimmy Webb video, one of the things that was going to kill the 737 that we were on was the fact that all three of the gear was due for major overhaul because they had hit a life limit. They hit so many, and those were tracked under landings. They had enough landings where they were going to have to turn around and pull the gear, completely overhaul it, and then put it back together, and then send it off, and it'd be good to go. So your responsibility is going to be determine what's applicable to the to what life limit's applicable to your particular situation. A serial number checklist becomes like a major thing. We used to do this in the Army all the time, where it was like once a month or so, a quality assurance person came out and verified that the right serial numbers were installed on that aircraft, because those serial numbers were tracked for life limits. And every so often, the production control guys would come down and say, hey, look, this transmission's only got like 200 hours left on it. Y'all need to start thinking about like what you're going to do whenever it goes down and we have to replace the transmission, or whatever part it may be. And then you, as the mechanic, are going to monitor its service life. If you got a customer that's coming and going on a regular basis, you're going to say like, hey, look, this thing right here, it's not going to be legal to be flown after a set number of hours, because we're going to have to replace this thing. And then try to talk to them about getting the part on hand, so that way whenever they fly, they can just taxi up. You do the maintenance, do the paperwork, and then return it back to service. So you keep that plane up as long as possible. You'll have to you're going to do the replacement. You're going to have to take things out, put things in to make sure that you keep those life limited parts in their healthy range, and not overflying the amount of time or cycles or hours or whatever is for it. Now, one of the big things with this is that you need to document the compliance appropriately, because you're going to have to write in there like, hey, look, I replaced the crankshaft part number 12345 with this serial number, so that basically says that, hey, look, this thing we know was going bad at these hours. They need to come out, and then we're going to replace it, and then we're going to basically say that we replaced it with this part number and this serial number. So if anybody has any questions, they can go back to your records and say, oh, this is when it happened, this is what happened with, all the good stuff, and then always say per whatever caused that life limit to come due, be it a AD, maintenance manual, ICA, whatever the situation is. And then you just return it to service. But that's pretty much it. Like your life limit part's pretty straightforward. It's not really that difficult to do. And frankly, you you generally don't see this that much. It seems like in general aviation. Maybe if you're at a flight school where it's really busy, most of the time you're going to see this in like heavier commercial operations, like airlines, military, people that are flying a lot and like basically like constantly. That's where you're going to see life limits really start to kick in. But you still need to be aware of them whenever you're a GA, business mechanic, that kind of thing, because this is still going to factor into your owner's decision making because it's going to be expensive. Like most of these life limit parts are not like O-rings. It's most of the time it's going to be stuff like struts or engines or whatever, and to replace them and maintain them or do whatever it is to reset that life is usually pretty pricey. So you want to pay attention to it and advise them as best as you can. Lastly, let's talk about documenting our maintenance practices per 14 CFR Part 43. Okay, so first off, we have to think about like what are we going to record? First, we're going to say the description of the work performed. This is what I did, when I did it, the completion date, the time and service of the aircraft at the time, reference to some sort of what are you working to. You can't just do things on your own. Did you replace any parts? What are those part numbers? What are those serial numbers? And then lastly, you're going to end it all with your signature and your certificate number. All right. All right, so things to keep in mind. You need to make sure that these are accurate. They're uh, going to determine the value of that aircraft, and it's going to determine the safety of that aircraft, because anything that you put in there is going to be worked off of in the future. And I'll tell you, after doing some general aviation work, it is really frustrating to have to come in behind somebody who had a really bad chicken scratch or made like all kinds of weird entries. You're trying to understand 30 years later what in the world they were talking about. Next thing, you need to have completeness. You need to make sure that what you put in there is the in totality of what was required to be put in there. If not, you're going to have to make somebody go and redo your work, and it's going to cost the owner money. It also needs to be timely. You need to record entries promptly after the work completed, not like later on, or else it'll end up coming back to bite you. It also needs to be legible. This is why I don't write in logbooks if I can help it. I will type it all out, put it on a big sticker paper, like a big label paper. Print that out, make sure it fits in the logbook, trim it with some scissors, and tape it in there that way. Now, you always make sure you want to have your compliance verification in there. You want to confirm that the work meets Part 43 or whatever, and aligns with whatever approved data that you are working to.